wooden pitman rods from old Singer treadle sewing machines. This is just a quick look at the wooden pitmans that were in use before about 1900. I don't exactly know when they stopped using them and went over to the steel pitmans, but for anybody that's missing these, or wants to make one, or is missing the adjusters out of the ends, because if you've got all this adjusting stuff missing out of the end of one of these pitmans, you're going to have a big gap like that, and that running on a bearing like this is going to clunk and knock around and be hopeless. And I've seen people on the internet working treadles without the adjuster set up properly, or with them missing completely, and it's just completely pointless for such a simple fix. You can make up something on one of these that will work, and you really can't treadle properly if things aren't adjusted nicely. So if you do have a treadle with wooden pitmans, take the pitman off, clean everything. They get very gunked up. Make sure the adjusters are free so that when you turn the screw in the end, which is in the end of the rod on both ends here, on both the pedal end and the crank end up here, it's exactly the same setup. They can be put on either way, so that when you turn that, you can adjust them properly to take up the wear, to take up any lost motion, so that the thing's not clunking around and making life really difficult to treadle. It's not fair to blame old technology and machines if things aren't adjusted properly, especially after 100 and something years. So this is just a quick look at them, and it might be helpful to anybody that's missing one and wants to make it, or just anyone that's really bored and is geeking out with some sewing machine videos. So there we go. If you have a look at this one down here, this is a 1930 something treadle. This is what most people encounter on treadle sewing machines made after about 1900. This is the steel pitman rod that's very, very basic, has a single ball joint on the bottom and a ball bearing race at the top. Very, very nice, very reliable. They don't give much trouble as long as they're lubricated. I think you can adjust the cup on the bottom to take up any lost wear on that ball joint, but apart from that, they're great. But if you haven't got one of those and you've got one of these, then you need maybe just to know a little bit more about them. The two lengths that are here, these come from two different treadle setups. So the shorter one is from a treadle that has the folding machine type setup. So there's an undercarriage and the machine folds down into a sort of cradle thing. And a lot of people don't realise, but the treadle irons, the frame is different on those. This bit of treadle sitting on the front is from a setup that the longer pitman came from. So this is one that doesn't fold, and the machine stays on the top all the time and is covered with a case. And in this case, the band wheel sits a couple of inches higher from the floor and from the pedal, so the pitman is longer. And I've just got this tatty old thing here to show you that's that setup with a non-folding machine and a longer pitman, albeit a metal one, but the same principle applies. And over the page, there is the folding version, and the pitman is shorter. And the difference is 2 inches. So if you are missing one of these, if it's a folding version, well, it's the shape of the irons really that make a difference, because there is an example here that has the lower band wheel but doesn't have a folding machine. So you can see, if you look at the shape of these shoulders here, if they curve around like that so that there would be room for an undercarriage here, then you've got the shorter pitman. And if you compare that to the shape of these shoulders here that fly all the way up to the top, you'll probably have want the longer pitman. So the difference is, we've got centre to centre measurements on the shorter one is 11 inches. So that's from the centre pivot on the pedal here to the crank, centre of the crank, 11 inches on the shorter one, and the longer one is 13 anyway. Not lining that up very nicely, but it's 13 inches. And the overhang from the centre, if we look at the very end, from the centre of the working hole, which is here, this bit here, to the very end is about 1.5 inches. It's not a crucial measurement as long as it doesn't hit the floor. That's fairly easy. Ooh. Right, and I've taken the adjusters out of this one so you can have a look what's involved. It's really basic. So there's the screw that goes in the end, that goes into that hole there and screws into this little metal block which is threaded on the inside. Then there's a washer, and then we've got the wooden block which is the bearing surface that pinches up. So that sits in here. Can't do that with one hand, but that sits in there like that and moves with the adjuster so that it hugs that bearing nice and snugly. So basically you are adjusting the distance between the metal and the wooden block. You can see it set up here. So the screw is going into the end, screwing through the metal block, through the washer, and pushing the wood onto the bearing. And the best way to adjust these once they've been cleaned nicely so that they're working freely and had some fresh grease put on them is just to tighten things up, and it's a clockwise turn to tighten them. Tighten them up so that they bind, and then just back them off a little bit so that things are nice and free and there's as little lost motion and as little friction as possible. That's what you're after. So yeah, that's the stuff that should be in here. And as I say, both ends are the same. You can tell when a treadle is adjusted nicely. It should be very free running and it should swing backwards and forwards a few times like this. And when you're using it, it shouldn't clunk. If you've got banging, clunking noises all over the place, it's not set up right. And it won't be very easy to learn to treadle on something like that. So do try and adjust them. And all of the cone bearings, you know, all of these things are designed to be serviced, and the pedal sensors that pivot here, the wheel sensors that run on these cone bearings here, everything's adjustable on these. So make sure they're adjusted properly. It's worthwhile doing, and you'll get a very smooth running treadle. So hope that's been useful or interesting or none of the above, but another much needed YouTube video, I'm sure. Thanks for watching.